Welcome to 6th grade mathematics with Miss Chelsey. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that I am working on a website. You can go to your child's math page on Schoology, and you'll see when you go to the math page, there's a banner, and then there's some buttons at the bottom. It's not there quite yet, but hopefully soon you'll see a button that says Miss Chelsey's website. I will put some tutorials on there and some just helpful things if you're working with your child doing math. I'm Miss Chelsey, and this is my 8th year of teaching. I started my career in New York City after graduating from NYU, and I previously taught in New York City for 5 years before moving back to Olympia, my hometown, 3 years ago. While teaching in New York City, I was fortunate to have connected with some thought leaders in math education who fundamentally transformed the way I saw myself as a mathematician, as well as my instructional approach to mathematics. While I was in New York City, I worked closely with the founders of Fostering Math Practices, whose instructional routines have helped shape modern math education. I worked with them to create exemplar videos of instructional routines that help students reason and communicate mathematically. I've been thrilled to bring this philosophy and approach to Washington Middle School. Mathematics education is in the midst of a revolution. And in order to help you understand this new approach, it's important to explore this question. Do we really need a new way to teach math? I'd like to start by sharing some data that we collected from 6th grade students at Washington Middle School. At the start of the year, your children took a math survey, and one of the questions was, are you a math person? And unfortunately, over half of our students don't yet see themselves as math people. And also, 1/4 of our students disagree or strongly disagree with seeing themselves as a math person. So we need to reassess our approach to mathematics so that students see the subject as relevant to their lives. Let's start by talking about the old approach to teaching mathematics. If your math education was anything like mine, it probably sounded like this. The teacher went to the board, they taught you how to solve, they said, in this kind of problem, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, and then they assigned either a worksheet or some problems from a textbook, and you practice that kind of problem over and over and over again until you could get to the answer reliably. So in old math, this old version of teaching math, it emphasizes answer getting. It really only cares about the answer. In this old style of teaching math, the teacher is the mathematical authority. The students don't get to come up with methods or really do any thinking. They just do what the teacher tells them to do. It's an avalanche of methods, meaning that students don't really know why they're doing what they're doing. They just do it because that's what their teacher told them to do. Old math is full of algorithms, computation, and emphasizes speed. It's largely mathematical mimicry. It's like pretending to do math because your teacher told you how to do the steps, but there wasn't much thinking involved. And unfortunately, our math content and curriculum has been largely unchanged since the 1800s. So we have yet to update our mathematical curriculum since the Industrial Revolution. So, what's wrong with this old way of teaching math? Well, I think Richard Riley, the former Secretary of Education, said it best. We are currently preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist, using technologies that haven't been invented in order to solve problems we don't even know are problems yet. So, we must transform math education so students learn the skills, not just to follow a set of robotic steps, but rather prepares them to be creative thinkers and problem solvers who can address these unknown and unsolved problems of our future. So, how does new math better prepare our students for this kind of future? Well, number one, students are going to participate in collaborative, open ended, creative, and visual problem solving. We're going to emphasize thinking like a mathematician. We're going to surface all of those amazing ways that students are thinking in order to strategize and solve. We're going to prioritize big ideas and number sense instead of just algorithms and following steps. Students will be positioned as the sense makers and as the mathematical authority. Instead of telling kids how to solve, we're going to give them problems that they've never seen before. We're going to let them grapple and connect to the mathematics that they've done before, and then teach each other these new and beautiful ways to problem solve. We're going to take a rough draft, final draft approach in math. That's sort of like in English language arts or really in any other subject. You have time to grapple with whatever it is that you're writing or making, and then you refine and revise those ideas over time. So instead of having tests where kids must get those answers correct that first time around, they need time to recognize their mistakes and revise their thinking. That's just how our brain grows. We're going to emphasize communicating and reasoning. That's essential to the discipline of mathematics. And lastly, and I would say most importantly, we're going to use mathematics as a lens for investigating and understanding the world around us. So instead of doing a set of 20 problems, we are going to actually use mathematics to look at problems or topics in this world to better understand the world around us. A great way to sum up this new approach to teaching mathematics is this quote: "Good mathematics is not about how many answers you know, it's about how you behave when you don't know. This is the core of true problem solving." So let's talk a little bit about what will be covered in sixth grade math. The first part that I would like to talk about is the standards for mathematical practice. So within the Common Core standards, there are these standards for mathematical practice, and these actually span every single grade level, and they are the backbone for learning mathematics. So every single day, we will be engaging in these ways of thinking. Students will make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. They will reason abstractly and quantitatively. They will construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, model with mathematics, use appropriate tools strategically, attend to precision, look for and make use of structure, and look for and express regularity and repeated reasoning. Also, in sixth grade, we will focus on these big ideas: using symbols to describe the world, visualizing the center and spread of the data, folding and unfolding objects, finding and using unit rates, reasoning with proportions, expanding the number line, generalizing, and taking apart prisms and polygons. So let's talk a little bit about grading. So each week, students get some assignments that they need to work on, both during Zoom in their small groups and perhaps independently. So in order to grade these assignments, I grade out of 3 points. So to get a practitioner or 3 points on these assignments, that means that you've met all of the success criteria for that assignment. I always list the success criteria before the lesson so that students have an opportunity to know the expectations for that assignment. Students will get an apprentice or 2 points if they meet most of the criteria, but there's some room for improvement. Or a novice, which is 1 point, means that they made an effort to do the assignment, but the work meets little to none of the success criteria. Students will also be graded on projects and assessments. So, like I said before, students won't be getting a traditional kind of test with a bunch of questions that they answer, which are then graded on if they got the answer right or not. So instead, students will be graded on 3 different criteria. They'll be graded on their problem solving. So did they pick a strategy that shows they understand this kind of problem? They will be graded on their representation and proof. So were they able to visually show this idea in a way that shows they understand this big mathematical concept that we may be working on? And then lastly, mathematical reasoning. So that involves the ability to communicate why a strategy works and explain a big idea in words. With each of these different criteria, students will either get a practitioner, apprentice, or a novice. I encourage all students to look at any feedback that I gave them and to revise their work. Mistakes, reflecting, and revising is actually how our brain grows. So it's not as important what you did the first time around, but that you took the time to reflect on anything that can be better. So your step one would be to look for feedback. And on Schoology, if you go to grades, right next to the assignment, I'll leave some instructions on where to find feedback and how to revise your work. Step two would be to actually revise it. So go back to the assignment, continually refer to the feedback as you revise to make sure that you don't forget something that you're supposed to revise. And then reach out to me if you need support or you're not sure how to revise that particular assignment. And then step three would be to resubmit. And I have a special form on my Schoology page called Did You Revise an Assignment? Fill out this form to resubmit your work. So if you're working at home and your child needs help with math, I have a list of do's and don'ts that will help you help them. So normalize struggle by telling your child that when they're struggling, their brain is growing. They need to hear this time and time again, especially because half of our students don't believe that they're math people yet. They need to know that struggling and persevering through struggle is what makes a mathematician, not just getting answers. Encourage them to take a break. Tell them some mathematicians work on one problem for years. It's important that students don't get self-defeated, but recognize when they need a break so that they can come back at it with a fresh lens. Also, help your child become a mathematical thinker by asking them questions. Ask them questions like, what do you notice or wonder? Can you count? What can you count or measure in this problem? How are the quantities related? What can you draw or represent to help make sense of this problem? How does this problem remind you of another problem you solved? And what's the big mathematical idea here? Throughout the year, the students will hear these questions a lot. And over time, students will take ownership of these questions when they get stuck. However, you can help them by asking these questions too. It'll reinforce how mathematicians think. Also, don't do these things. Don't tell them how to solve. Math is not about answer getting. It's about what you do when you don't know what to do. So be sure to go back to those questions to help advance their thinking instead of giving them steps to solve. Also, please don't show them new abstract methods like invert and multiply, especially if they can't explain how that method connects to a visual representation. Remember that mathematics is about big ideas, not about answer getting and not just about procedure. Also, don't say I'm not good at math. We are all math people, and it's important that the students see that we are all learning and growing, and we can all become, with perseverance and effort, good at anything. Expectations. So it's really important for students to come to Zoom class. Studies show that the biggest gains in mathematics are made when students have an opportunity to grapple alongside other students, discuss their ideas, and build consensus. I know that this is hard on Zoom, and I also know that sometimes we have technological difficulties that make it a challenge. But whenever we can, we should keep trying to build this culture because math really is a team sport. Also, during Zoom class, I expect that students follow our group work agreements. Students actually came up with these agreements themselves. We spent a considerable amount of time deciding on what good group work looks like and sounds like. So I have those group work agreements here. I think it's really important that you have conversations with your students about the courage that it takes to speak up in this kind of environment. Right now, I only have about a third of my students who turn on their video, and oftentimes when they're in small groups, they still feel vulnerable and it's hard to talk to people that they don't know. Keep encouraging them. They will come out of their shell. It'll just take a little longer than normal. And as I said before, we are all math people. So even if you're someone who feels like math was never my thing, I assure you math is everybody's thing. And I hope that through this class and seeing your student engage in mathematics in this new transformative way, that perhaps you learn something new about math as well. Feel free to contact me. My email is below, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.